The following episode contains descriptions of violence and is not suited to all listeners. Discretion is advised. For confidential support, please contact your local crisis centre.
On the 28th of July 2024, the Australian Federal Police and the National Missing Persons Coordination Centre launched the Always Searching campaign, focusing on 8 cases of missing women from around Australia. As you may already know from some of the other episodes, about 50,000 missing person reports are made to police every year, and about 2,500 people remain missing long term. In 2024, 8 missing women were nominated by the Australian Federal Police state and territory counterparts to be featured in the National Missing Persons Week 2024 campaign. Laura Hayworth, missing since January 2008, last seen in Queanbeyan in New South Wales. Anne-Marie Jeffrey, missing since August 2020, last seen in Lake Aragon, New South Wales. Nancy Grundwalt, missing since March 1993, last seen in Scamander in Tasmania. Julie Garciacelay, missing since July 1975, last seen in North Melbourne, Victoria. Chantel McDougall, missing since July 2007, last seen in Nannup, Western Australia. Angie Lee Fuller, missing since January 2023, last seen in Alice Springs, Northern Territory. Tanya Buckland, missing since August 2013, last seen in Warwick, Queensland. Susan Goodwin, missing since July 2002, last seen in Port Lincoln, South Australia. This episode focuses on one of those women, Julie Anna Garciacelay. On the 1st of July 1975, Julie went to work at Southdown Press at LaTrobe Street in Melbourne, Victoria, where she worked as a library reference clerk. Southdown Press was the parent company for the Truth newspaper, and their office was about 2 to 3 minutes from Julie and her sister Gayle's apartment in North Melbourne. A witness reported that she saw and heard Julie speak to 3 men at the library at Southdown Press. One of those men was a Mr. John Grant and was a crime reporter for the Truth newspaper. Another man, the witness recalled, had the last name of Collins, and the 3 men were seeking information or articles on soul food, which is a type of cuisine. The witness reported that the men wanted to open a restaurant and sought information to help them. Whether they had direct intentions to do so or whether it was a fabrication to meet Julie, we will never know. The witness then recalled that Julie and the 3 men had arranged to meet at Julie's apartment that evening to discuss the business venture. Julie was born in Stockton, California. She had long brown hair, olive complexion, medium build, and an American accent. Julie was a skilled pianist. Julie had moved to Australia the year prior to live with her sister Gayle. It is theorised that Julie knew John Grant because of his employment at the Truth newspaper, but may not have known the other 2 men who accompanied him that day. Julie returned home after work to her apartment in North Melbourne. Gayle, her sister, had made plans to visit her friend Barbara Somerton's apartment in Kew, which is another suburb in Melbourne, to watch her colour television, a novelty at that time. Gayle asked Julie to call her workplace before 11 p.m. to advise that Gayle would not be at work the next day. Gayle scribbled the number on a piece of paper and left a small amount of change for Julie to make the call at a local payphone, as that was the only way to make a phone call back then. Gayle left their apartment at approximately 8 p.m. after talking to 2 kitchenware salesmen for approximately 45 minutes. When Gayle left their apartment, Julie was alone and waiting for the 3 men to arrive. What happens between 8 p.m. on the evening of the 1st of July 1975 and 1 p.m. on the 2nd of July is unable to be confirmed and is based solely on statements from the 3 men. On the 2nd of July at 1 p.m., Gayle returned home in the company of her friend Barbara and her husband Francis. Gayle noticed the apartment looked untidy but left to go to lunch at the Toorak Hotel as Gayle presumed Julie was at work. In the afternoon, sometime between 3:40 p.m. and 4 p.m., Gayle returned home to the apartment with Mr. and Mrs. Somerton to find that Julie was still not home. Gayle became increasingly concerned for her welfare, so Barbara called the Southdown Press only to have an employee confirm that Julie had not attended work on the 2nd of July. According to 2 sources, when Gayle arrived home, she found Julie's cut-up underwear and pyjama pants on the floor in the kitchen. A pyjama top and torn items of clothing were found in Julie's bedroom. there was also evidence of alcohol consumption in the flat. Julie's glasses, contact lenses, house keys, and medication were also all located inside the flat. One source says that Gayle also identified that $125 in cash was missing, as well as a butcher's knife and a long black cape of Julie's.
If you love our episodes and would like to hear more, we appreciate your support over on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can help us keep doing what we love and create episodes you love to listen to. Find us on patreon.com/Ezra Magazine.
The following information in this section is unable to be verified and consists of unsigned statements provided by the three men who were supposed to meet Julie that evening. It wasn't until the 11th of July 1975, 9 days after Julie had gone missing, that Mr. Collins provided an unsigned statement to Victoria Police. Mr. Collins stated that he, John Grant, and John Joseph Power attended Julie's apartment on the evening of 1st of July 1975. They supposedly went to the Metropolitan Hotel and brought a dozen bottles of beer with them, and Mr. Collins stated that the group stayed at Miss Garciacelay's apartment talking, drinking, and playing records. At an unknown time, Mr. Grant and Mr. Power went out to get food and returned a short time later with 2 pizzas. According to Mr. Collins, at approximately 10:30 p.m, Miss Garciacelay left the apartment to make a telephone call for her sister. And Mr. Collins stated he stayed at the apartment with Mr. Grant and Mr. Power. Miss Garciacelay did not return, and the 3 men left the apartment with Mr. Collins being dropped home at approximately 11 p.m. John Grant, the newspaper reporter, provided an unsigned and undated statement regarding Miss Garciacelay's disappearance. He confirmed that he, after having beers at the Metropolitan Hotel, and the 2 men drove around as instructed by Collins and parked outside a block of flats. Tommy Collins then got out of the car, knocked on the door of Flat 9 in Canning Street, and then returned to the car to say that they were okay to come inside. The 3 men walk inside, and according to Mr. Grant, Julie is having a glass of red wine. After a while, Power and Grant decide to go get pizzas, but Power says to Grant, quote, "You're not driving my car, I'll drive." They then drive down to Racecourse Road to get 2 pizzas and return. Whilst on the trip, Power says to John Grant something along the lines of, quote, "I wonder if Tommy's tried the sour," which according to crime reporter Andrew Rawle means rape in old criminal terms, as in sour grape. According to Mr. Grant, the 2 men walk up to the door, don't hear anything, and knock at the door, and either Collins or Garciacelay opens the door. Mr. Grant then says that the 3 men had left after Miss Garciacelay did not return from going to make a telephone call. According to the 2 men's statements, the 3 men then left Julie's house and drove Tom Collins to a suburb called Rosanna. Then John Power drove back to the city, where Grant said Power dropped him at his office, remembering this is just a few minutes from Julie's apartment. John Grant said he went inside to make a phone call to his boss to get a taxi voucher to go home, and the last he saw John Power was driving away on LaTrobe Street.
Did you know you can access our references, show notes, and read more about the cases we investigate over on our website? Visit EzraMagazine.com/the title of the episode to view associated images, references, and links to deep dive into the episodes just like we did.
John Joseph Power was a criminal. He was a man accused of murdering a woman 3 years before Julie's disappearance, and who was subsequently convicted of stabbing and sexually assaulting a 19-year-old woman in the suburb of North Melbourne in 1992. Power was a well-known criminal and traded in robbing banks. He apparently suspected that a man had interfered with his 2 daughters, but in a shooting gone wrong, he ended up killing the man's mother. Power had gone around with a mate to kill a man and had fired, so the case went, a shotgun through the window of a house where this person lived. Unfortunately, the guy was not behind the window, but it was his mother, and John Power killed the mother. He was acquitted of that murder. A month later, John Power was captured on security cameras holding up a bank with a shotgun, for which he received 12 to 15 years in prison. Julie was reported missing to police on the 2nd of July 1975, and an investigation commenced. However, the thoroughness of the investigation is unable to be confirmed despite the findings of the coronial inquest. On the 3rd of July, Grant gets word from his colleagues that the police know Power and Collins had gone to Julie's flat. Each of them makes an unsigned statement to the police, and in the eyes of the law at that time, she was a missing person and it was not a murder investigation. Police were then unable to get any more information and did not even go to the Truth office to check whether the taxi voucher had been used by John Grant. According to one source, the police that investigated Julie's disappearance were apparently the same police that investigated the Easy Street murders. In a tragic coincidence, because John Grant had been ruled out as a suspect in the Easy Street murders thanks to DNA, Grant was actually visiting a colleague next door to where the two Sues lived, which is a colleague called Alona Stevens, who also worked at the Truth newspaper. Alona Stevens is the one who notices the woman's dog missing and leads it into the laneway behind the Easy Street house. Whilst it is purely conjecture that it had an impact on the investigation into Julie's disappearance, I'd be remiss to mention that there was a large amount of corruption in Victoria Police at the time. It just so happened that 3 months before Julie's disappearance, an inquiry referred to hereon as the Beach Inquiry was set up to inquire and report on matters concerning the Victoria Police regarding allegations of corruption and misconduct. The inquiry's terms of reference, or the scope of the inquiry, was to examine whether there was any credible evidence raising a strong and probable presumption that any, and if so, which members of the Victoria Police Force were guilty of criminal conspiracy, perjury, subornation of perjury, extortion, fabrication of false evidence, compounding a felony, aiding and abetting the commission of any offence, or demanding or soliciting or accepting any money or any reward directly or indirectly from any person or persons in breach of any regulation under the Police Regulation Act in 1958. It was also investigating whether police failed to observe or comply with any provisions of the Chief of Commissioner's standing orders in relation to the investigation and obtaining evidence from suspected persons. The proceedings of the Beach Inquiry commenced on the 26th of March 1975 and concluded on the 28th of June 1976. The transcript of the inquiry ran to 38 volumes with 761 exhibits, including clothing, tape recordings, and a rifle. The number of witnesses, including policemen and civilians who appeared, was 240. By the 28th of June 1976, it had cost the state of Victoria about $590,000. The result of the inquiry was adverse findings against 55 police officers. 32 of those were prosecuted, but all were acquitted. Beach found that some police officers violated procedural principles regulating the process of obtaining evidence, principles without the force of law. The inquiry board recommended the establishment of precise suspect rights with the force of law and also recommended rights and protection provisions such as the tape recording of suspect interviews, the videotaping of lineups, and the establishment of a system independent of the police force to hear and investigate complaints against the police. Remember, this inquiry happened at the same time as the initial investigation into the disappearance of Julia Garciacelay. Whilst again, it's purely conjecture, criminals and the police at the time were probably in a state of agitation as this inquiry was going on. The police were granted permission to reinvestigate Julie's disappearance some 28 years later, in 2003. They spoke to John Grant's boss about whether he remembered John Grant calling him about the taxi, of which, of course, he couldn't remember. In 2002, just before the reinvestigation, there was a court order which prevented police from speaking to John Power because he was, quote, dying of a heart condition. However, in the same year, he attacked a sex worker when the sex worker said he could have 15 minutes less than he wanted to, so he grabbed her and put a knife to her neck. Eventually, he was allowed to speak to the police, where he gave a no-comment interview. Fast forward to 2018, a coronial inquest was established into Julie's disappearance. The worst part of this story is that Julie's mother, Ruth, wasn't informed there was an inquest and hadn't been contacted by police since 1977. Ruth is quoted as saying in a recent memorial for Julie in 2024 that in Victoria that she just wants to bury her daughter. The results of the 2018 inquest found that, quote, having investigated the death of Miss Garciacelay and having held an inquest in relation to her suspected death on the 11th of April 2018 in Melbourne, I am satisfied of the following matters to the required standard. A. That despite no body being located, Miss Garciacelay, born the 10th of July, 1955, is deceased. B. That despite there being no evidence as to the exact circumstances and cause of Miss Garciacelay's death, her death was the result of homicide. And C. That despite, quote, extensive criminal investigation conducted by Victoria Police, end quote, no person or persons have been conclusively identified to date as being responsible for causing Miss Garciacelay's death. On that basis, I am also satisfied that no investigation which I am empowered by the Act to undertake would result in the identification of the person or persons who caused Miss Garciacelay's death. In 2002, Ruth Garciacelay, Julie's mother, established an annual piano scholarship in loving honour of her daughter, Julie Ann, an exceptional pianist. The annual scholarship in California is to the amount of $500. This year marks 50 years since Julie Garciacelay was murdered on the 1st of July, 1975. If you were living in the area of North Melbourne at that time and can remember something, even if you think it insignificant, please call Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000. That's 1-800-333-000.